All right, ladies and gentlemen, if you could take your seats, please. We have to stay on schedule. All right, thank you very much. So let me introduce Vice Dean Cronquist, who's going to come to the stage and moderate the faculty panel discussions. And, you know, just a friendly reminder, if I may, some of you have heard me say this before, but the definition of a question is a single sentence with a question mark at the end of it. And it'll help everybody become capable of getting involved and engaged if we just keep the questions shorter. Thank you. Henrik, please come forward.
All right, thank you very much. So let me start by saying the obvious. When you're talking about a top business school, then you need top faculty on the school's staff. So here at the Miami Business School, we have more than 150 full-time dedicated faculty members. And they represent a diverse set of different expertise and skills. And not only are they diverse with respect to their knowledge, also with respect to gender, with respect to cultural background. So we have more than 30 different countries represented on our faculty. And so today's speakers are coming from a variety of different countries, from the UK, here from the US, from Australia, from Israel, from China. Another thing to notice about our speakers is that some of them have been with our school for a very long period of time. Those of you that are alumni, former students from here, you will recognize them. And some of our faculty speakers, they have been here for a shorter period of time. So this is a good opportunity for us to introduce them to you. So very happy to have our first speaker, that is Dr. Robert Plant, who many of you probably know. So let me be brief in my introduction, but Dr. Plant, he received his PhD in artificial intelligence from University of Liverpool. He's a fellow of the British Computer Society. And one thing that I reflected upon was that Robert Plant didn't get his PhD yesterday. It was a while ago. So he got his PhD in artificial intelligence before that was a cool thing to do. So he sort of was part of creating this area. He is the chair of our business technology department, and he's written a number of different books and also articles in the intersection of business and technology. He's a regular contributor to Harvard Business Review, and some of his articles in recent years are called "To Build a Global Brand, You Need a Global App," or "Brand Intelligence is Equal to Big Data plus Consumer Intelligence." It's our great pleasure to have Robert Plant as our first faculty speaker today.
First of all, hello. It's nice to see some familiar faces. I recognize some of my students from over the years, and I promise I'm not going to be asking you anything about boxy diagrams or Porter strategic matrix or anything too horrifying. But it's been a real honor to be here for it's my 31st year here. It seems like yesterday. And the irony is that I actually came here, I was brought here by, those of you may remember David Hertz. David brought me here to work at the AI lab. We had an Intelligent Computer Systems Research Institute. So I was brought here to do AI work, and that was before the AI dark winter, as it is termed by people in the field, which was basically what happened from '92 until relatively recently. What happened was that AI had been around since Turing started doing his thing in 1930s, when there weren't any computers, and then it evolved through the 50s and then into the 90s, and then of course the sales folks overhyped it, and next thing you know, we couldn't really deliver on our promises that weren't actually from us, it was from the salespeople, so in industry. So we kind of went back into our academic lives in other places in the world, and kept doing our thing while other sexy topics came out, and the web and other issues, the crash. We had 2 crashes, thanks to our friends in finance. Just kidding. So they kept you busy and occupied, and we kind of were in the background. So then basically what happened was, and we're going to go through a little presentation here on the space about AI. All of this had to come together into a fabric, and that's really happened over the last 4 or 5, 6 years, really. So I'm going to just take you on a little bit of a journey here. It's going to be kind of a little Orwellian at times, but I wanted to kick off here with something, this kind of scary looking person on the screen here. We're at an inflection point, I think, in society and in generally in the global business arena. And you've got to try and figure out where we're going to go on this inflection point. This is really, truly, I think, a time of incredible concern, and it's also a time of hope in some ways. I started this research that I've been doing for the last 4 or 5 years by a journey to London. I was at Chatham House, which is a think tank in the UK. And my editor asked me a question. He said, well, what are you thinking about doing next? Because I've been doing things on reshoring and supply chain and various things. And I said, well, I'm really interested in demographics, specifically in Japan. And he said, well, why? What is so interesting? And I said, well, let's have a look at the world through this lens of population. And if we look at this, I was took when I came across a factoid on that journey to the UK, and it was basically that Japan is at the far on my left here of this chart. So in 2050, they will have the same population they had basically at the end of the First World War, which is 1/3 less people than they have today. So that started me on a journey, and I started to discuss this journey, and it leads me in all kinds of strange places, and students and others get kind of upset, and all kinds of emotions come out of this conversation in the classroom, which I think is good. And the journey is, imagine America with 100 million less people. I'll just let you think about it for a second, right? Because that's Japan in 2050. Now, suddenly people go, oh, you know, we have influxes of population, that's what we do. But Japan doesn't. Japan basically doesn't have children, doesn't have a migrant policy, has no migrant worker policy, has no immigration. So what are they going to do to fill that gap? And that's where this journey of mine really started. So I worked with Dr. Manuel Santos, who's the chair of the economics department, and Tariq Said, who's in my department, and we basically crunched numbers, and we went out, we got every census return since 1950, which is 63 million data points. It's all the government will give us, and we crunched every single one to look at what the impact of change was in technology basically upon the labor force. And what we end up with, this is a kind of a quick snapshot. We looked at it against autonomy and non-autonomy in the work function. So non-autonomy is on the number 1 scale. Autonomy is on the 1920 scale on the right here. And we can see here how job change over time is occurring. And we got a group in the middle, which is sort of the service sector is probably the best way to put this. They're next in terms of job negative growth rate. You can already see here in sectors 1, it's too small on the scale to see here on this graph, but 1, 5, they're all basically diminishing spaces. And this is quite concerning as a society. I had my professional MBA class on Monday where I showed them some of this, and they're like, oh my God. And I said, yeah, you know, this is the 1%, right? So the 1 to 5% is up here, the 18, 19 category. And we were talking about migration and immigration and all these issues that are in the current discourse in society today. And I said, imagine, regardless of your politics, I've been warned not to do politics, is imagine you're president and head of the Fed for a day. because we're all great, right? Mike Tyson says everybody's got a plan until you're punched in the face, right? So imagine you're going to be, tomorrow I make you president and head of the Fed. How do you solve this problem, right? Because what we can actually see here is the wage bill diminishing across huge swathes of society. I don't have an answer, and they haven't made me head of the Fed lately. So I'm just going to take you through some of the dystopic future that we lays ahead. Start off with some bad news, and then we'll hopefully get to some good news a little bit later. And it's not necessarily good news if you're in the 19 category either. We had the head of IBM Watson here last year, and a radiologist stood up at the back and said, hey, I've been studying to be a radiologist for 40 years. What do you suggest I should do in my future? Because instead of making $1 million a year, I'm now going to make $500,000 a year because Watson is taking my job. The answer was, maybe you need to retrain. I don't think that was exactly the answer he was looking for, but even in the top right-hand corner, it's scary. I will give you an insight, and actually Larry Summers actually reflected this as well when he was here in the Distinguished Lecture Series last year, was that you need to be an expert in a specialty area, you need to be great at analytics, but also you need to be able to communicate. And I know later on we have an expert, one of my colleagues is going to speak on emotional intelligence. And what we actually did was do research to look at this, and emotional intelligence plus autonomy is really the key to maintaining a success in the future for yourselves and for your children. Anyway, so what is of the future, right? Question is, where is the future, and how far into the future can we look? And we're going to start to think of how we can solve the problems of the future. And I thought, you know, we can't really have a business school discussion without Peter Drucker. So the best way to predict the future is to create it. So I'm not all negative. Sometimes my students call me Dr. Doom, but we try and get through this. We're going to try and rise to the occasion, right? What we really have here is the rise of the machine. And this is not an overnight phenomenon, right? So it's interesting. Most people who use technology really have no understanding of how long it took for that piece of technology to end up in their hands. It's hard to compete against Captain Kirk, who was on earlier, but in a sense, you know, when I was a boy, the communicator on Star Trek was really a thing from the future, but now we've all got one in our hands all day long, right? So the cell phone is there. So we kind of start to get a snapshot in time. The question we really want to ask, though, now is because of this singularity idea, is how is this going to come together? So what is the idea of relativity, right? Relativity, then, is really the idea that in 1968, you know, when I was watching Star Trek, and, you know, I think I'm lucky that I'm part of the sort of generation that remembers going to the moon, and we really did go. You know, I think my parents bought me Robbie the Robot, right? And I guess this is sort of the catalyst for our thought processes about robotic systems. We made toy robots that kind of looked like we thought they should do, like humanoid things with caterpillar tracks. If we fast forward to 1992, in 1992, I was here at the university, and Paul was my dean, and I often used to go up to Boston, and I used to go to the Draper Labs, which was next door to MIT, and at MIT, what they had was some researchers who'd been working on the problem of robotic solutions, and this is a robot. I don't know if hopefully we'll see the video. This actually is sort of an ostrich. This is about 1992. They started doing this in the late 80s, and I don't know, is this going to play? Is it going to play? Let's see if Elliot can make it play. Nope. Yes? No? Okay, doesn't play. See? Opposite of AI. All right, so this does actually walk on a treadmill. And it started off basically as a pogo stick that would jump up and down. And the one that you just saw was a biped, and it could actually run on the treadmill. Now, why am I showing you this? Well, I want people to understand time, relativity, time, because where are you going to be in 25 years? And how is the world going to look, right? So if we look at what the world's doing now, so I don't have a mouse, I can't make this run. Okay, so this is the same people 25 years later, okay? 25 more years, what I want you to do is start to project, right? What is the future going to look like, right? Well, productivity, right? We're in a business school. We're very interested in the idea of productivity. Mr. Miller earlier spoke about productivity, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well in my thought process. He also asked the question about your home, right? So how many computers do we have in our home? In our car, for instance, though, we have around 3,200. So in our home, we're all familiar with our friend Alexa, right? Or one of the other device gadgets that you may have. You may have a Nest, you have a thermostat, right? And then Dean Quelch has this at his house. So to make sure we don't break in. So all of these are great devices, and these have come out relatively recently, right? Now, of course, this starts to get a bit spooky now because the Nest starts to remind us of some other issues around life, and trust becomes number one, right? I was struck a little earlier with the idea of the house of the future and its ability to protect you. I interviewed the head of the CEO of the largest door opening manufacturer in the US recently, and he's got connection to all of his door openers, but he hasn't actually released it on the world because he's worried that someone's going to reach into the letterbox and say, hey, open the front door. So trust becomes transparently, interesting in our life journey here. Let's not dwell on the house for a second. Let's think about Uber, right? Uber was mentioned a little earlier too. Uber's interesting, right? We all love Uber. It's this gig economy. It's this idea of driving efficiency. But who is your driver? The driver's an interesting thing, right? Because if you talk about electric vehicles and geopolitics and how Uber's going to change the world and robots are going to change geopolitical world landscape, right? When we hit 6 million car production, we're going to see that that's actually equal to the Saudi Arabian oil production for gasoline, and then we won't need that. We'll leave that aside. Also, what we can say is that the cost of driving a car for Uber will actually decrease by 50% when they get rid of the driver. Which reminds me of another MIT professor that I used to love. His name's Marvin Minsky, and he just called us meat machines. Humans are meat machines, which kind of is interesting in the sense that the driver is really a machine. You know, you get in, it drives you somewhere, you get out. Do I care if it's a human? Well, maybe. Depends. We have the adage now about, well, what happens if the car comes across a child in the middle of the road? Or an elderly person? Which one does it kill? And there's some interesting research just being done, also at MIT, but they couldn't solve that problem, so they threw it out to the world. Evidently, it depends on where you live in the world, what your answer to that question is. If you're from Asia, the data showed that elderly people lived, younger people died. If you're in South America and the Francophile African countries, younger people lived. There's lots of data on this space. So we talk about ethics, we talk about trust, we talk about getting a car, we turn over all of these aspects to the robotic system. Then we end up with what we just saw. Can you play this, Elliot? Oh, I'm kind of scared to click anything now. AI and real stupidity. It's two things at the opposite ends of the spectrum in our land. Oh, I went too fast. I shouldn't have played. Can you hit for me? Is he going to do it? Make it so. Oh, tried capturing. Okay.
Hal's not letting me back in.
Open the pod bay doors, please, Hal. Hello, Hal, do you read me? Hello, Hal, do you read me? Do you read me, Hal? Do you read me, Hal? Hello, Hal, do you read me? Hello, Hal, do you read me? Do you read me, Hal?
Affirmative, Dave. I read you.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
What's the problem?
I think you know what the problem is just as well as I do.
What are you talking about, Hal?
This mission is too important for me to allow you to jeopardize it.
I don't know what you're talking about, Hal.
I know that you and Frank were planning to disconnect me, and I'm afraid that's something I cannot allow to happen.
Maybe, Elliot, can you stop that for a second?
Oh, here,
All right.
Hal's not letting me back.
All right, so we had the beautiful eye of Nest, the camera, and now we got Hal. And we're all kind of freaked out and creeped out and think, okay, Alexa's really listening to me because occasionally he comes up with that cackling laughter or whatever it is in the darkness of the evening. Privacy then kind of starts to become central to the robotic AI of the future. AI isn't about all robots. It's really about lots of different technologies that connect together. 1984, one of my favorite British authors, of George Orwell, who wrote on this subject and many others, is a true visionary in his position, right? He wrote this in 1948 before he died, that following year. The camera utopic world that we live in, those of us who grew up in London, or if you, I don't know, lived in other parts of the world, you tracked all the time. And you don't mind it, you kind of get used to it, but it's kind of interesting, right? Because they're smarter than we are now. You look at this picture. The robotic AI solutions know who this is. Maybe it's somebody in the room, I don't know. Well, I have a hard time. Even if I'm squinting, I wouldn't know who that is. The AI knows who that is. And that's kind of worrying because now we can identify people and the systems can identify people, and who's making the decisions within the system because the system's happening at nanosecond speed. Geo-tracking, very interesting. We tie that into the facial recognition, we tie that into people. There's an interesting report in the Wall Street Journal today, maybe you read it this morning, about the people who were hanging out outside Tesla factory, picking up geolocation pings from people's phones going into the factory and then monitoring them in the factory and tying that into productivity figures and selling that data to hedge funds ahead of the productivity numbers being released. So they knew that there was a 30% increase in human labor, and then amplifying that with the robotic solutions that Elon has put in place. So it's not the individual factors that are concerning, it's when we start to tie these all together. Big data is really the exhaust fumes of the Internet of Things. And we're going to quickly look at that. I have to move forward. So we can get faces out of lots of pixels, lots of data, information. You can get lots of information out of a pixel if you put it into context. They know everything about you from a single data pixel because they put it into context. You can't sort for solutions, you have to run it through. And you never know what Orson Welles was thinking. But I think he would be smiling today. Business, let's talk about business then. So all of these AI technologies have come together. There is some good news. As Stuart earlier mentioned, we still see Moore's Law in effect. We see telecommunications driving productivity forward in terms of connectivity. We needed that too. So distributed compute, which is what enables the cloud to happen and what enables AI to happen, is still continuing. Now, most people focus on the robots, but it's really about the Internet of Things. When we see 50+ billion things connected together within the next 10 years, every aspect of your life is going to be monitored by an IP address. Every single grain of sand on the planet can have its own IP address, and that's what's going to happen. So everything we do will be monitored. Now, hopefully we can evolve. Corporations have to evolve because their lifespan is diminishing rapidly in terms of their ability to compete. If we look at 2006, which didn't seem very long ago, if you reflect, who would have said Exxon, GE? Remember GE? They had a dividend once. And down here, we end up with technology will eat the world, and it's doing so. If we look at this map, what we can see is the growth of Apple when they hit a certain dynamic. They hit the network effect. And it's kind of amazing that what they've done since the sad and unfortunate passing of Steve Jobs, they have doubled their valuation. This is all because the world is not yet digitized. We sit here, we think we're digitized, we go home, we order Netflix, we have Uber Eats, they deliver what we want, and it comes. Only 40% of the world is currently digital. This is from a great study, landmark study from McKinsey. Supply chain is only yet 6% digitized. This is going to continue. The bad news is that people haven't thought about, and CEOs get really freaked out about when I talk to them about it, is the fact that earnings and revenues actually are going to decrease. This is counterintuitive. It's going to decrease because what's happening is we're taking the friction out of the supply chain. It makes us more efficient. We drop our prices. We kill everybody else. We gain market share by dropping prices. It's the Amazon effect. This is from, I'm borrowing a slide here from Jorge Ruiz, who visited us recently, but it's really the exponential business model here. The goal of driving connectivity, and the AI, as Stuart said earlier, helps you find the connectivity. The Internet of Things drives the data. That goes out into the exhaust fumes, and then eventually we make the world in a different way. What's the impact on labor? I couldn't leave the talk today without impact of labor, which is where we started this discussion. Well, labor's quite scary. I think this is a very scary thing. There was another point in the paper this morning. I don't know if you read the report in the Wall Street Journal. So we're still liking my class. I'm like, did you read the paper at 6:30 in the morning? If so, you were late. There was an interesting piece that said that the number of people, men aged between 24 and 34, went from 6.4 to 14.2% unemployed, who didn't get a high school GED. So they're at the bottom end of the left-hand side of this spectrum here. Question is, what are we going to do, and how's that going to be solved? I mean, I don't have the answers, but I'm going to show you something here, if we can run this, that relates to Stuart earlier. This is in China. This is about productivity. What we're going to see here is they're going to build a 3-story high-rise, or low-rise, in 48 hours. They build a 57-story building in 19 days. It goes back to Mr. Miller's prefabrication process. What we have here, can you drop the volume down, is the idea of eventually taking this process and fully automating it with robotic solutions. Because this is really a vision processing problem, coupled with a sequencing problem. So I'm trying to help you think about what's going to happen in 20 years, 20, 25 years. Building companies will be of this nature. So here we see the hours in the bottom left-hand corner. Those are years sometimes in various developments near my house, but those are hours. Oh, you're doing the 57-story one? I thought you were doing the 5-story one. Okay, so if you run that video, you'll see at home, they basically do the whole thing in 48 hours, or a 57-story building in 19 days. Okay, so very interesting. Just to help us along that journey is my final video here. I really wanted one of these because my house got flooded last year in the hurricane. I'm still trying to fix it because I can't get any drywall guy because there is no labor supply. The labor supply is shrunk. So this is the solution that we kind of want to have in our life. Now remember, 25 years between the last videos. Can't wait to go to Home Depot and rent one. I see this as the future. I really do. I think we're going to fill in a lot of gaps with labor productivity of this type. We've already seen it in the white-collar sector. We're going to see it in this sector. If you look at industries like agriculture, you know, one robot can now peel lettuces, replaces 6 people. You know, you can pack that lettuce into a plastic container. Another 6 people have lost their jobs. I don't have a positive outcome for this. But this is the reality, and as a society, it's something we have to grasp. I could turn to Elon for his view, and he's kind of all over the place in this, and I think it's kind of interesting. His productivity numbers, if you've read his book and you've studied SpaceX and Tesla, are amazing, right? He's an innovator beyond. And his prognostication actually is the last person on the planet with a job will be an AI programmer. As an AI guy, I kind of like that. I think that's okay, but I don't know. I was also born in the city where Charles Darwin went to school, so I kind of thought it'd be much more optimistic to end on a on a positive note, that it's not the strongest of the species that survive, nor the most intelligent that survives. It's the ones that adapt most to change. And I think society will adapt to change. This technology, though, will be changing in an enormous way. It's going to encompass every aspect of our life. And I think it's behoven upon the leadership of the group here and the students who are coming through in the next generation to understand this and the speed at which this change is occurring and its impact on society, and that we help everybody in society to be able to have a meaningful life and a role in that societal position. So thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you.
We have time for one question.
Yes, sir.
You talked about the demographics of doomsday being faced by Japan. How important do you think demographics across the world is relative to AI, technology, and all the changes that are coming in the future?
Well, if we went back to that graph, right, the world is separated into the emerging worlds in some ways and the developed world. I mean, Africa is going to be the most populous continent in the next, over the next 50 years beyond all stretch of the imagination, as in the West and in the developed countries that population rate decreases. Africa is going to leapfrog many technology platforms that are inhibiting in our existing structures that we have in the developed world, and they're going to, embrace technologies that are around telecommunications. The dynamics around, I didn't show the dynamics around employee-less work environments. This is a huge political problem. So for instance, JD is Amazon of China. JD China basically just had their first fully automated warehouse with no people in it. I came from the car sector many years ago, and we have other car folks here who will remember when car factories actually had people in who made and assembled the vehicle. Those have disappeared, right? So robots do all that work. Demographically, I think young people are going to have to follow Secretary Summers' advice. They're going to have to drill down hard on a single topic. They're going to have to really understand analytical data. They're going to actually have to like maths. And they're going to have to be great at communicating, not just on the phone, but to people and communicate with emotional intelligence. If you don't do that, it's going to be a very dark place for people, because the robots' productivity and the connectivity of the robots is the threat. The robots are going to start talking to each other. Thank you. After he's done this, you've got to go now.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Robert.
Thank you.
So Dr. Plant will be around later on during the day if you want to continue the conversation with him about the future of business and technology. Now, we're ready for our next speaker, who is Dr. Caroline Mortensen, and she received her PhD from the up north, University of Michigan. And she's a professor in the Department of Health Management and Policy, and she's also the director of our Master in Health Administration program. Her research is about health insurance and healthcare utilization, and based on this research, she was recently testifying for the US Congress about the Medicare Advantage program. So she's a well-recognized scholar in this field with a lot of her work being policy relevant. Not only is she a top scholar and researcher, she's also well known to have received multiple awards for her mentorship of students and for her teaching. And if you like her presentation today, I would also like to advertise some of her work that is in the November issue of Harvard Business Review under the Defend Your Research portion. It's about how tattoos impact your earnings. Okay. Caroline, Dr. Mortensen, she is doing research in a variety of different fields, so she is here today to talk about something different. Welcome.
Thanks for that, I appreciate it. Is this the clicker? Thank you, Henrik, for that introduction. You can write your own introduction, but it does not mean that's the one that they read. But thank you for that. And thank you all for being here. Our students mean so much to us. So it means a lot to us to see the faces in the room that we recognize either from having them as students in class or as graduates who come back into our classroom, and we really appreciate. So Ben Riestra just the other day gave our students a tour of the beautiful Lennar facility that he is Chief Administrative Officer of. So we appreciate that. And we're also proud to have you back because there's been a lot of changes, a lot of energy, a lot of excitement at the Miami Business School. So we're happy to share all of that with you. You'll notice that in the title of my talk, Taking the Temperature of the Healthcare System, I don't have the word future in there. Next week, our future could change in terms of healthcare. So we are in the middle of midterm elections. Does anyone know where healthcare ranks in terms of top priorities, issues for voters? I hear twos and I see a lot of ones. Number one, which is so exciting for people like me, because there's attention on the healthcare system. Why? Why do we care about healthcare in an election? I'm going to pick front row people because then we can hear you better. Why do we care about healthcare in an election?
Great change, political shifts between one party and another.
Parties see very differently on how to move forward with healthcare policy. Absolutely. What else about our healthcare system makes it a voter issue? Touches everybody. We invest in our healthcare system and we think our health will improve, right? Anything else? Do we do this at a low cost in the United States? No, not so much, right? So we have number one issue, healthcare. We're very excited about that. We spend so much, so $3.4 trillion. I like when it's written out like this so you can see all the zeros. That's just in 1 year we spend $3.4 trillion, and that's on 5% of the US population. So that's where half of our spending is spent on 5% of the population. So we spend a lot of money. We don't have very good outcomes or access to care for what we spend, and a lot of this is coming from the taxpayer dollar, right? About 30 cents of the tax dollar last year was invested in health. So you would think that we have the world's best healthcare system. Unfortunately, we don't. So when we look at a variety of different metrics and look at how we rank against other healthcare systems, we tend to fall towards the bottom, and that's frustrating because we don't need to put more money into the system. We need to sort of recreate the system. So there may be some recreation, after next week when we see the outcomes of the elections. Just one more international comparison where we are similar. So we have much higher levels of healthcare spending. That trillion is far exceeded than any other country, but our growth rates in healthcare spending are largely the same. So about 4%, at least since 2010. I tried to do on my iPhone the calculator, what's 4% of 3.4 trillion? My phone couldn't do it. So it's a small increase, but it's a lot of money, right? So for US in particular, when you're already at 3.4 trillion, 4% is a lot of money. But that growth rate itself, 4%, is quite similar to the growth rates across other countries as well. Now, what drives that increase in growth rates is technology. And going back to the point earlier, we want to invest in technology because we believe that's going to make us a healthier population. So we continue to all be okay with investing more dollars into healthcare because we believe that investment is better than all those robots we saw before. We would rather have a healthier year of life. So we continue to make those investments. So we can talk a little bit about technology, but I'm going to sort of take the angle of technology doesn't always do what we want it to do. Now, if you walk around in a scavenger hunt in the business school and try to find a fax machine, let me know if you find one, because every time I need to send a fax, I can never find a fax machine. But you run into a healthcare facility, and there are fax machines everywhere. So 2018, and we still communicate via fax in healthcare. So why is that? So two policy-oriented reasons. I want to talk a lot about policy today. The first reason is the HITECH Act under the Obama administration invested over $30 billion in electronic health records for hospitals. Now, almost every hospital has an electronic health record. But what do we know about those health records? They're not interoperable. They don't communicate with one another. So then the physicians get frustrated and run back to the fax machine. Fax machine under HIPAA, which was legislation written by longest-serving Health and Human Services Secretary and former University of Miami president, Donna Shalala, who also comes to class and sort of tells a story about how she wrote HIPAA. HIPAA says the fax machine is a secure form of communication. So you think about it, you don't hear about fax machines getting hacked in the same way that you hear about electronic health records getting hacked, right? So it is a secure mode, but it's 2018. There are better ways that we can move forward. So when we think about policy, we have to think about carefully educating our members of Congress to ensure that the policies have the intended consequences as opposed to the unintended consequences. So just talking about policy, when I say a policy that expands Medicaid, that subsidizes private health insurance purchases for individuals, requires everyone to have health insurance coverage, and taxes overly generous insurance plans. What policy am I talking about when I say that? The Affordable Care Act, right? Which is true. The ACA does all of this, but so does a precursor to the ACA. So back in the late 80s, the Heritage Foundation, Stuart Butler, with a lot of insight from Mark Pauly at the Wharton School, developed what they were calling affordable health care for all Americans. And I just pulled the first two. I don't want to belabor the point, but the first is change the tax treatment of health care. I'll talk about what that means in just a minute. But the second is mandate all households obtain insurance. So this was a Republican right-leaning idea. Obama didn't like it. Obama did not want the individual mandate. The industry told him, you will have an individual mandate. So he said, okay, we will have an individual mandate. But the politics of that, those tensions, took ideas that were more right-leaning. Once they were embraced, they sort of kind of fell apart. So where we are is just this contentious, sort of difficult policy environment. So tax treatment, changing the tax treatment of healthcare, Republicans and Democrats think that's important to change the tax treatment of healthcare. So what does that mean? That means what you hear about a lot, the Obamacare subsidies. They cost about $49 billion in 2017. The Medicaid expansion cost about $70 billion in 2017. But the health insurance that we all get from our employers, we're not taxed on our health insurance benefits. Our employer's not taxed on our health insurance benefits. So that $250 billion in revenue is foregone every year. That's sort of the elephant in the room. We don't talk a lot about those foregone tax revenues that we could be generating. I think it's important to have a policy discussion, around that. But we're not talking about it. We're sort of contentious. Heritage Foundation says that's not really what we meant with affordable health care. So that's sort of where we are in 2018. So a little bit about the ACA. There are winners in the ACA, and there are also losers under the Affordable Care Act. The winners right now are this remarkable stability and resiliency of the Affordable Care Act. Everyone is surprised when I tell my students, hey, the Affordable Care Act is doing well this year. Premiums only increased about 1% this year. Nobody believes me when I say that because we have this rhetoric around it's not going to work. We know that the Trump administration doesn't exactly embrace it. Even Congress under Obama had a difficult time improving it, but it's resilient. It's still around. And actually, for the first time, the premiums actually dipped for a lot of enrollees. They are still expensive. For a lot of populations, they're still unaffordable. The subsidies aren't quite enough, but it's out there, and it seems to be increasingly popular. So for the first time in the polls, it's really getting more favorable than negative reviews. This one, we're in a business school. I have to put up some S&P and Dow Jones Industrials here. The healthcare industry as a whole has done extremely well in the post-Affordable Care Act era. Perhaps that's surprising, but they're doing really quite well. So if you just look at the S&P Healthcare Index, it's increased far more rapidly than the S&P Index alone or the Dow Index alone. So there are some clear winners from the passage of the Affordable Care Act, or in the timing since the Affordable Care Act. But there are also losers. Rural hospitals, this is just from this week in the New York Times, rural hospitals, particularly in areas that are in non-expansion states for Medicaid, are closing at a very rapid pace. So in a lot of communities, those rural hospitals are the only access point for health care, and those are continuing to close because these hospitals just don't know how to survive in this environment. So just a couple minutes talking about hospitals. We're supposed to be talking about the future. The hospital is not the future of healthcare, right? And so we see that with Ben Riestra and what he's doing over at Lennar. It's a hospital facility, but it's nothing like what we're used to with a traditional hospital. A lot of my students say, I want to be a hospital CEO. I say, well, think about what else you can do beyond just, maybe get a couple years experience in the hospital and then sort of move on. So hospitals were built around paper health records. As we moved away from paper health records, there's no need to have totally different service lines under the same roof when the electronic health record allows for that flexibility. So the popularity of Lennar, a lot of people don't like to go into a hospital. They do like to go into Lennar. So we're seeing increasingly this movement towards ambulatory care sites as opposed to the traditional inpatient hospitals. So hospitals have to figure out how do we adapt to this changing environment. So much about value-based reimbursement, quality-based reimbursement. If I polled each of you on what does value mean, everyone would have a different answer. If I polled each of you on what does quality mean, everyone would have a different answer or a different metric. So hospitals are sort of told things are changing, but they don't really know how to adapt to those particular changes. What they do in response is just continue to increase their charges. So we used to say like healthcare spending is unsustainable. They were saying this in the 80s. We're still saying this now, and the response still seems to be, well, let's just charge a little more and see what happens. Not necessarily delivering any higher quality care, but continuing to charge more. So So in 2015, there was a study out that identified the top 50 highest charging hospitals across the country. These hospitals on average were charging 1,000% more than what it cost to deliver the care that they were delivering. So huge markups of their charge to cost ratios. 20 of those 50 were located in Florida. Several of them are run by our alums, so like, great job, guys. You're doing what you need to do. And so we're really proud. But once I moved to Florida and saw that 20 were in this state, literally as I moved here, and noticing also, a lot of this was happening soon after Steve Ullman started teaching healthcare in the exec program, these significant increases in charges over time. So we pulled together a team, University of Miami, and said, let's study this. Let's see what happened. If your hospital name and location and how much you overcharge patients is in the news, don't you respond to that? Like, what would you do? Maybe just for 1 year not increase our charges, right? Sort of lay low and not increase the charges. No, they didn't do that. They just continued to increase their charges. So even that public shaming of putting out these hospitals as the most expensive hospitals and not necessarily the highest quality hospitals, even with that information, hospitals continue to increase their charges. They don't know what else to do. The cost structure is really, really difficult to get under control. I think University of Miami Health System struggles with that as well. So we know how to improve revenues, you just increase your charges, but we don't know how to get our costs under control in hospitals. So this was just our data points showing even after that announcement came out of these highest charging hospitals, they continue to just increase their charges over time. The Washington Post got a hold of this and she said, let me just see specific hospitals, how much their charges have increased over time. Almost 100% increase in charges in just a couple-year period. So sort of what we do in Florida is just continue to improve the charges and not improve the quality of care. So what do hospitals do? They say, well, we have Medicare. And we have a lot of over 65 patients, so Medicare will just sort of lift all boats. Rising tide will lift all our boats. Not anymore. So Medicare margins for the average hospital have been negative for over 15 years. What that means is for the average Medicare patient, it's costing them more to care for the patient than they're generating in revenues from the Medicare program. So not everyone, HCA, again, our alums are out there doing really well. So some hospitals are doing fine, but other hospitals are really struggling. It's sort of the takeaway point here, payment shifts and regulatory mandates. So what hospitals are really struggling with is all of this regulation that they have to go through and trying to understand what does quality mean? How do we measure it? How are the measures changing over time? And that's what members of Congress are doing to our physicians, to our hospital administrators, changing everything all the time. We're sort of in a constant period of flux. This was just an example pulled from Modern Healthcare the other day on how much each average hospital, so an average hospital, about 200 beds, has 5 staff dedicated just to the quality reporting and spending over $1 million just on the quality reporting and trying to understand what is the new payment model that we're operating under and how do we try to make some money off of this new payment model. So just maybe 2 days ago on Halloween, here's Peter Roskam. So he's a Republican. He is the chair of the Subcommittee of Health for the House Ways and Means Committee in Congress. So Ways and Means is where all the money comes from, right? They determine what taxes are and how we spend. So he's probably one of the more powerful members of Congress. The article goes on to say Peter Roskam is in the fight for his life. He may not win his re-election next week. Powerful chair, Subcommittee on Health. He knows a lot about healthcare. He has a lot to learn. I try to help him with that, but he knows a lot about healthcare. He's going to potentially switch out. And so where do we go from there? So that's why it's sort of hard to predict what is the future when we don't even know sort of what's happening currently. So Roskam makes the point that 25% of spending on hospitals, $200 billion per year, is related to paperwork. So there's overburden, regulatory burden on hospitals, and the hospitals are really suffering. So the last couple points I wanted to make, I was too nervous to try a video, so I just have a couple pictures. This is me testifying before Congress. This is Peter Roskam drilling me on trying to learn more. So kudos to him on trying to get information about, now, how exactly does this work? But you kind of step back and say, but hey, you wrote that policy, right? So you kind of have to know how it works. You built in those incentives. And they don't know, right? So it's our job to sort of inform them. This is kind of how it works. This is what it means. So in this part of the video, he's saying to me, so wait a minute. When you say we're measuring quality, you're saying that the insurance companies don't know in Medicare Advantage right now, they don't know what quality metrics they're going to be ranked on or what that ranking will mean? And I said, that's correct. So it's like I can tell my students a 91 or above is an A. These plans don't know what's 3-star, what's 3.5-star, what's 4-star, what's 5-star, and there are huge reimbursement implications. If you're a 5-star plan, the gates to heaven open for you. You get all kinds of additional payments, all kinds of flexibility, but these insurance companies don't know what metrics will be measured, and they're all process measures. And he says to me, what's that word you used earlier? What's that word? Oh, outcomes. Outcomes. Right? So he's like struggling to find the word of right, yeah, so did this actually improve somebody's healthcare outcomes? I think Congress should recognize that, and I think that you should measure that and reimburse healthcare plans on that. And they're open to it. The plans are saying, sure, tell us how we can improve, and tell us how we can improve patient health. So he says to me, are you telling me that goalposts are constantly moving? And it's probably good I don't show the video, because yes, I'm telling you that goalposts are moving. They don't know, right? So they're writing the policies. They don't quite know how all of this works. So just to sort of sum up, it's the importance of education, and particularly what we're doing here at the Miami Business School. Like Julio Frank, when he introduced, he said, we're so unique. We've got this academic medical center and this fantastic business school and the interaction between the two. So our healthcare MBA turns 40 this year. We're super proud of our program. And what we're doing, though, is actually saving lives. So there's a paper out earlier in the Business Alliance for Healthcare Management. So there's about 20 business schools around the world who are invited to join Miami Business School as a member. We're very excited about that. And we sort of get together with healthcare management programs that are located in a business school. There really aren't that many around the country or around the world. So they have their own outlets for sort of publishing research. And there's a study that looked at 9 different countries. And they looked at hospitals that were located in areas where there was a business school and a medical school providing a joint curriculum, and compared to the areas where there was none, or there was just a medical school or just a business school. And they found that management quality was significantly higher in areas just like ours, as was patient mortality. So patient mortality rates were lower for hospitals that were located in areas where there were these business schools who are doing exactly what we do. So it's fun to see the importance of education. I hope you guys are all learning something when you're back today, and thank you for your time. I don't. The voting coalition is still so powerful for Medicare. If you look back, the Catastrophic Care Act of 1988 was passed where there was prescription drug coverage, but it was financed only by the Medicare beneficiaries. And there were these great, I show my students the videos of the 65 and over population banging on the windows of the car of members of Congress trying to drive away because they don't want to have to subsidize their own care. They are comfortable. And even, so Atul Gawande is one of my favorite writers. He talks about healthcare as a human right. He says, for some reason as a society, we're totally okay with Medicare because we feel like we've all paid into it and it'll be there for us at the end of the day because it's not means tested. As soon as you take a program like that, like Medicaid, and make it means tested, nobody likes Medicaid. Sure. There's a lot of research being done on the voucher system. It doesn't seem like a terrible idea, but it could have some unintended consequences that we haven't fully thought through. So I think certainly a voucher system before we went on to a means tested. And on that note, there's also reference pricing. So maybe we could just find a price that we all sort of accept is enough for a knee replacement and sort of build from there. Like Medicare will pay that much, and if you go beyond, maybe you or your supplemental insurance would bear that instead. Great question.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I think we already learned a lot from our faculty speakers. Caroline has only been here for 3 years, but is already making a big impact on our students, as you can tell from her presentation. She's one of our rising stars. Talking about stars, another one is next. That's Dr. Marie Dasborough. She received her PhD in organizational behavior from the University of Queensland Business School, and she still maintains that charming Aussie accent. She's a professor in our management department, and her research is focusing on leadership, emotional intelligence, and the dynamics of teams. Based on this expertise, she is teaching a variety of different courses to master-level students, to executive education participants as well. And those courses are related to topics such as high-performance leadership and leading across cultures. She is also actively involved on several editorial boards for academic research, including being on the board of the Journal of Organizational Behavior, and the Leadership Quarterly. So please welcome Dr. Marie Dasborough.
Thank you. Hello. I'm delighted to be here today and to see so many people in the audience. This is really fabulous. Today I'm going to share with you some of my thoughts about the emotional skills that leaders need to succeed in workplaces of the future. When I'm talking about emotional skills, I'm talking about a range of skills that come under the umbrella of emotional intelligence. I'm sure you've heard of that phrase, right? Okay, I need to present some academic research. Emotional intelligence is important for everybody. It will predict how quickly you can run a marathon, whether you drive like a crazy driver in Miami, and something that all of us will find fascinating, your emotional intelligence is related to your romantic relationship satisfaction. We should all care about this, right? Let's get into the business world. What does this mean for us? Well, emotional intelligence is particularly important for leaders. We know now through research that leaders who are high on emotional intelligence earn more money. That makes it important, right? We have to talk about money. We're in the business school. I don't usually talk about it, but this gets people's attention. Emotional intelligence enables this to happen because if you have these emotional skills, you develop higher quality relationships with people at work. You're building up your social capital. And that's ultimately what gets you promoted and gets the pay raises. So, we should care about emotional intelligence, especially if you're in a leadership position. So what is it? Well, in 1990, Mayer and Salovey, they published the first article about emotional intelligence, and they define it as the ability to perceive emotion in yourself, as well as other people around you, to understand what these emotions mean, and as well being able to regulate those emotions. So being able to manage your emotional responses, plus the ability to influence emotions of those around you. Emotional intelligence became really popular after Goleman's book. Did any of you read this book? Back in 1995, there's some people. His claims were really quite out there, saying emotional intelligence matters more than IQ. We need to gather lots of evidence really to support that. And you can see in the academic world, there are millions of studies trying to look at the impact of emotional intelligence. A lot of these studies are about leadership and how emotional intelligence helps us become better leaders. How can we tell if somebody is emotionally intelligent? A good way is you look at how they handle a stressful, high-pressure situation. Do they look like this? People who are high on emotional intelligence, you can see that they behave differently. They know what they're feeling. They can label the emotion. They also have awareness of how others around them are coping in the situation. They look for the emotions that others are experiencing. They understand why they're feeling that way. And if they're not really sure, they will actually ask questions. Why is it that I'm feeling upset? Why is it that I'm feeling angry? Asking these questions increases our understanding, and then that helps us with the next step, which is managing that emotion. A highly emotionally intelligent person can regulate themselves. If they are experiencing intense negative emotion, they can calm themselves so that the emotion is less intense and it's not as disruptive to their productivity. This is important for leaders, right? We also need to manage the people around us. If we can see that our employees are emotionally charged and it's distracting them from work, we need to get them back, get their focus back on work. Leaders who are high on emotional intelligence can do this. So it's pretty obvious, right? Leaders need emotional intelligence. So what new am I going to bring to the table today? Well, I'm going to predict that emotional intelligence is going to be even more important in the future. We have to look at what the workplace of the future looks like. And the good news is that we have a survey that tells us. Every year, the Society for Industrial and Organisational Psychology, they put out a survey and ask the members, what do you think are the biggest trends influencing workplaces in the future? And in 2018, they had 800 members complete the survey, and we have a list of the top trends. I'm going to share with you the top 5. Coming in at number 5. We've been talking about this, right? Work is changing thanks to technology. We're seeing more people working from home. We have computers, laptops, thank you, internet. The emails keep coming. The cell phone, the work emails keep coming. It doesn't matter where you are. A lot of changes, right? So what does this mean for the employees? Well, some people might be really excited about this. Some people are now working in co-working spaces like WeWork. You can work from home. It's great. The flexibility is great. So there's some positive emotion, but there is a lot of negativity related to this. There's a bit of fear about what changes are coming next. These changes keep coming. There's also loneliness. If you're working at home and you don't have co-workers with you, it can be quite isolating. And finally, stress levels. Every time I get work email after hours, my stress level goes up a little bit more. I just need a break. Please don't email me on the weekends. Trend number 2 that I'm going to talk about, artificial intelligence. We already heard a lot about this from Dr. Plant, and the reality is that robots are going to be your co-workers. There's no denying that. We know that that will happen. So what does this mean? Well, Dr. Plant would be very excited about it, but not everybody will have that same level of enthusiasm. Some people find it a bit creepy. There are also feelings of, wow, this robot coming in, my job might be eliminated. There's a lot of frustration and negativity linked to that. And maybe there's some sadness that comes. In the picture here, this robot is called Flippy. Flippy makes burgers. Can you imagine being this woman working alongside Flippy? If that was me, I'd be really sad. I need somebody to talk to. I'd get lonely. Trend number 3, work-life balance and wellness. We're seeing a lot of new perks being introduced into the workplace. The laundry idea. Dean Quelch, I want to talk to you about the laundry. It will increase employee wellness and happiness. We're doing a lot of screening, biometric screening. Come into work, we'll take your blood pressure, check your cholesterol. Here you can see, again, there's a range of emotions. Positive, we've got excitement and gratitude, but there's also some negativity. We don't want to be tracked. We don't want our boss to know what's happening with our diet and lack of exercise. And the more we know about our well-being, the more depressed we could get. Maybe we're not as healthy as we thought we were. These are some consequences that we may not think about. Coming in at number 2, diversity, inclusion, equity. We're seeing a lot of stories about this in the media. We are working on unconscious bias. We're looking at how to hire people, selecting people, how we compensate people. We are moving in the right direction in terms of these things. And we're building more inclusive cultures. Here at UM earlier, there was a talk about our culture of belonging. That's all about inclusion. Here we see the range of emotions again. Positive emotional responses, but there's also some negative emotions that may come. We might be angry when we find out about prior discrimination. We might be frustrated that these changes haven't been happening fast enough. And for a small percentage, there may be people who are not comfortable with diversity. They may not be open to it. What's the #1 trend? Any guesses? When I put this slide up, it might make people nervous. That's the #1 thing. That's the #1 trend impacting workplaces. You cannot read any media, you cannot go into any workplace today without somebody talking about this. And we do need to talk about it, obviously. We're seeing more training, we're seeing changes to policy, and we're working to eradicate toxic cultures. Emotional responses, again, we have a range. Yesterday at Google, they had a worldwide walkout. Google employees, they know. They're finding out the details about how sexual harassment has been dealt with in the past, and they're angry about it. Fear? Sure. The more we're talking about sexual harassment, the more nervous some people are getting. Can I hug my coworker? Can I go out for a one-on-one lunch with someone of the opposite gender? In Miami, this is really tricky. It's really tricky if you're a touchy-feely person like me. So what does this mean? Well, I've gone through the 5 trends, and you can see there's a whole range of emotions associated with each one. What I want leaders of the future to realise is that the negative emotions are signals. They are critical pieces of information that cannot be ignored. Whenever there are the negative emotions, an emotionally intelligent leader will perceive them and then do something about them. They'll ask questions to understand where the emotion is coming from. They'll try to manage the emotions of the employees. If they ignore them, then the negative emotions will spread throughout the organisation through emotional contagion. That is not good. So, in the news last month, CEO of LinkedIn says this: skill shortage, it's not about coding. He says that the thing that we should be focused on as we look to the future is soft skills. Soft skills is what I'm talking about. People skills, dealing with the emotions. I'm going to finish with a prediction that's related to this. The empathy economy is coming. This is the next wave. Being able to demonstrate true empathy, that's the only thing the robots can't do yet. They're trying, but they're not there. And so this is what leaders of the future need to focus on. This is the most valuable human capability. That's what makes us unique, and that is what is going to help us survive in this new age. All right, with that, I'm going to finish because I know it's lunchtime, we've had a long morning, and I think, Dean Quelch, did you have some words to say? All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So Marie Dasborough will be around during the lunchtime, so if you want to ask more questions. However, before we get to the lunch, we have one more item before that. And so I would like to welcome up to the stage Professor Paul Sugrue, who was the long-term dean of our school here. And this is part of an award ceremony where we'll give out a couple of awards. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Henry. It is my pleasure today to present the Miami Business School Distinguished Alumni Award to an undergraduate and a graduate alumnus. The purpose of this award is to recognize distinguished alums who have distinguished themselves in their professional career and in their communities through volunteer work and have maintained strong links with their alma mater. The Undergraduate Alumnus of Distinction Award is presented now to Martin Rosen. Martin? The Graduate Distinguished Alumni Award, it's a pleasure to present to William Sheehan. Bill? I would now like to introduce Alfred Bunge. Here he is, that's Alfred. And himself an alum of our MBA program, and I might add a fellow Naval Academy graduate. Alfred?
Good afternoon, and if you'll indulge me, I'm here to present an award, the Alumni Excellence Award, to a person that we want to recognize today for having exemplified throughout their career and their achievements the spirit, the values, the excellence that we espouse here at the U. And so this person is a fellow board member on the Board of Overseers and has spent her career not only promoting academia at the law school at Duke and NYU, but also as a fundraiser for the Brookings Institution as well as the Chautauqua Foundation. And so I'd like to invite Linda Steckley to please join me up here at the podium.
Thanks. I'm just going to round it out with one final award before we go to lunch, but I just want to say what a fantastic pleasure it is to see Mr. Rosen here. And I want everybody to realize that Marty Rosen is a graduate of this school from 1954. Let's give him another round of applause. So. Actually, we need another one, so so I'm here finally to present an award to Sandy Goldstein, who's also on our Board of Overseers and is the CEO of Capsicum Group based in Philadelphia. He's for many years was in the public accounting. He, in addition to that, was a corporate executive with Airgas for many years, and then set up his own company, which is a major consulting company in the area of cybersecurity and data espionage. So we're very pleased to be able to honor Sandy today. He and his family have also been very generous in challenge grants within our school for student scholarships, both at the undergraduate and the graduate level. And so in many ways, Sandy deserves this exemplary service award, which we're here to honor him with today. Thank you, Sandy. So now, ladies and gentlemen, box lunches are available outside, and we look forward to seeing you back here in an hour.